The Syrian government is locked in heavy fighting with rebels. Despite their efforts of blocking the rebels' advances, the rebels have seized Hama. More in our next report.
In their lightning offensive, rebel forces have already captured large areas of the territory besides the second largest city, Aleppo. By late Wednesday, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights Monitor said that government troops were engaged in fierce resistance and were trying to stop the rebels from advancing. The observatory says 704 people, mostly combatants, and 110 civilians have already been killed since the violence erupted last week. This marks the most intense fighting in Syria since the ceasefire in 2020, after years of civil war ravaged the country. Meanwhile, the rebels have claimed victory in the city of Tel Rifat. Armed fighters stood by abandoned military tanks and patrolled the streets as hundreds of jubilant locals began to return home.
The city of Tel Rifat and its surroundings were completely liberated, and a number of tanks and helicopters were captured. We captured a number of prisoners of war from Assad's group, but we are waiting for the area to be cleared of mines so that our civilian brothers can return to their homes.
While one city saw civilians returning, many have been fleeing from another. Several people have been displaced in the Aleppo region following the latest escalation. According to the United Nations, over 115,000 people are displaced after the rebels' offensive in the north. Meanwhile, doctors and paramedics in Aleppo say that they are suffering from a severe shortage of personnel and medical supplies. The Aleppo University Hospital, damaged by bombing over the past week, is still working to only provide first aid services.
Hospitals are often put out of service. There is a lack of staff and equipment. All hospitals are out of service due to the bombing of hospitals.
Residents of Aleppo are facing a severe crisis of their own due to shortage of essentials after the city fell to rebel forces. Since then, the situation has only deteriorated. Bureau Report, WION World is One.
All right, for more on this from London, we have with us Chris Doyle, Director of CABU Council for Arab-British Understanding and the current lead spokesperson for CABU. Thank you so much for joining us on WION. What does the fall of Hama signify at this point?
Well, it signifies that the rebel offensive, these myriad groups who have come together to take Aleppo, still has momentum. Hama is a major city, perhaps the fourth largest in Syria, a centre for agriculture, and it lies only roughly about 50 kilometres north of Homs, which is the third largest city. And here, if they now move on to Homs, that actually controls access to the Mediterranean from Syria. So it would cut vital supply lines for the Syrian regime based in Damascus to the south in terms of resupply and so forth. So this momentum has not been checked. Many thought that perhaps the regime, with of course the backing of Russia, of Iran, of affiliated militia groups, would have done so by now. And I think that now we can see a really, for the first time in a long, long time, a really direct challenge to the survival of the Assad regime. For these groups to have made such progress in only a matter of weeks must surely have created huge jitters in Damascus. There must be a feeling of unease, and one wonders how many others might join such rebel groups, how many might defect from the army. But also, I think this is also very important. Despite all of this, and despite the abysmal record of the regime, there's still a lot of nervousness and fear for Syrian civilians. They're not sure about these rebel groups. Some of them are quite hardline Islamist, authoritarian, like Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, which used to have an affiliation with Al-Qaeda. It says now that it is far more inclusive. It's going to treat many of the minorities much better and give them full rights. But there will be also a struggle for the governance of these areas that these groups are now in control of. How will they be governed? How will they be run? Will there be any bloodletting, revenge, and so forth? It's a very, very delicate situation.
And what are the options for the Syrian army and Assad? With casualties mounting, how will the current offensive impact civilian population?
Well, you have to remember that the Syrian civilian population is living under sanctions. It's living, really with all the consequences of the war that started with the peaceful protests back in 2011. It's an economy that is smashed. So it's been a struggle for survival with or without the rebel advances that we've seen in recent weeks. So they will be bunkering down. They will be fearful. They don't know whether there will be regime reprisals, whether there's going to be bombings of Hama, as there have been in the north around Aleppo, of civilian targets, including, as your report stated, hospitals. They don't know also whether if these rebel groups get closer to Damascus, the capital, whether there would be even more, bloodletting. So there's a lot of nervousness and uncertainty. It's not a comfortable situation. There aren't easy options for Syrian civilians in terms of fleeing, because, of course, Lebanon has been in crisis. It's not an attractive prospect to go there. And they have precious little resources to take with them.
Wow. Thank you so much for those comments and your analysis. Of course, we'll be watching this development very closely. I look forward to speaking to you again very soon.